Last week in Canberra, the Treasurer held a productivity 3-day roundtable. There was various people from different corners of the economy, Parliament, and everything in between. And the idea was to get productivity happening again in Australia. One of the people who were at that roundtable was Allegra Spender. She's an independent MP from the seat of Wentworth in eastern Sydney. I wanted to chat with her just to get a bit of a vibe check on the roundtable, maybe a bit of behind the scenes, and also her views, because she also held a tax roundtable recently as well. She has been on the podcast previously talking about this stuff. But before we get into the chat, I just want to maybe preface a couple of things so it makes sense in the chat. Day one was resilience and global pressures. Day two was productivity and regulatory reform. And day three was budget sustainability and tax reform. In the chat, you'll hear me talk about the review that Ken Henry did in 2009, Australia's future tax system. And the reason that I wanted to just share this high level was because it's kind of the last major review that has been done, and some of the measures that were mentioned have half been implemented and bits and pieces. But I'll read a paragraph from that review. Australia has too many taxes and too many complicated ways of delivering multiple policy objectives through the tax and transfer systems. The capacity of the legislative and operating platforms of these systems and their human users to deal with the resulting complexity has been overreached. The tax and transfer architecture is overburdened and beginning to fail in dealing efficiently and effectively with multiple policy goals and demands. Rationalisation of the tax and transfer architecture should now be a strategic priority. And I'll just break down some high-level things. Revenue raising should be concentrated on 4 robust and efficient tax bases. Personal income assessed on a more comprehensive base. Business income with a more growth-orientated rates and base. Private consumption through broad, simple taxes. Economic rents from natural resources and land on comprehensive bases, noting that the revenue from rent taxes will likely be more volatile than from existing resource royalties it will replace. Other taxes should be maintained only if they efficiently address social or economic costs, such as tax on tobacco, alcohol, gambling, and environmental costs, and efficient road user taxes or charges. And that's kind of, that was talked about, this road user tax or charges in 2009, and now we're seeing this with the EV stuff happening. In time, the following taxes should be abolished and their revenue replaced by taxes applying to the 4 robust and efficient tax bases: insurance taxes, payroll taxes, property transfer taxes, which is your stamp duties on the purchase of motor vehicles, resource royalties replaced by the rent tax, luxury car tax, the tax on superannuation contributions in the fund, income taxes on government pensions, allowances and benefits, and fuel and vehicle registration taxes if replaced by more efficient road user charges. So that's interesting because at the moment the road user charge is only on EV, where the last comprehensive tax report said basically piss off everything, start again with a road user charge. I just want to talk about income taxes. A much higher personal tax-free threshold, around $25,000, should replace the current complex array of thresholds and offsets. A simple, transparent 2-step tax scale should apply. Ask ScoMo how that went. Deductions and offsets should be rationalised, and they're actually, with most work-related deductions, replaced by a standard rate of deduction linked to the level of income from work. So Albo is at the moment talking about adding in this standard deduction. And I just want to move on to superannuation because this episode will go up on the main show and also our Retire Right podcast. So hello to both audiences, and apologies if you do listen to both, but you are in the minority. There are completely separate audiences in the main. So Ken Henry said, the tax on superannuation contributions in the fund should be abolished. So that's the 15% contributions tax. Instead, employer superannuation contributions should be included in an employee's taxable income, subject to annual limits. All contributions would attract a tax offset payable to contributors. All income and gains of superannuation funds should be taxed at a rate of 7.5%. So that's, at the moment it's 15% internally. The reason I just wanted to reference that before I play the interview, because one of the questions I asked Allegra was Ken Henry saying anything different than basically his comprehensive tax review. But thank you so much for listening. You're about to hear my chat with Allegra Spender. We recorded it. I like to timestamp and date stamp these because it is going up, because it's relevant, on Wednesday the 27th of August at 1:30 p.m. My name is Glen James, and let's do a podcast right now. You're listening to Money, 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 or as the regulars like to call us, M3. Everything discussed on the podcast is general advice only, which I'm licensed to give, and details can be found in the show notes. My name's Glen James, former financial advisor, now podcaster. I host this show and a show called Retire Right. I've also got a book called The Quick Start Guide to Investing, which you can check out wherever good books are sold, or there's a link in the show notes. Otherwise, thanks so much for listening today. Now on with the show. Allegra Spender, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, before we get into the round table or oval table discussions that were last week, for our listeners who may not know of you, can you maybe give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Allegra Spender. I'm the member for Wentworth, which is, if you think of Sydney, Bondi Beach and outwards, is the way I like to think about it. It's the eastern suburbs. In terms of my background, look, I'll be honest, if you asked me 4 years ago, was I going to be in politics, I would have said no, I would have laughed, because I spent most of my life in business. I studied economics, started out in consulting for McKinsey, spent about 10 years running my family's fashion business, Carla's and Patty, also ran a small not-for-profit in education for disadvantaged kids. But I started to get into politics as an independent because I wanted to see, I'll be honest, climate action. I wanted to see more women in parliament. And I also wanted to see rational, evidence-based, basically policy making, particularly with a sort of strong business and economic lens, because that's really my background.
So you thought you would join politics and drain the swamp. That's what you're saying.
Exactly right. No, it's an incredible job, I have to say.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but it is a huge, huge privilege to do it.
Yeah. Now, the economic roundtable, what was it? So there might be people that may not watch or listen to the news. It was around productivity. Who organised it? What were you doing there, and who else was there?
Sure. Look, so it was organised by the Treasurer, who said, look, we want to focus on productivity and economic reform, and why don't we get together a range of around 25 to sort of 30 people from across the business sector, unions, academics, entrepreneurs, social sector, so a pretty broad range of people together to talk about some of the biggest economic issues facing the country, particularly resilience, productivity and sustainability. I was there as there were only very few politicians there. The Treasurer was there, the Shadow Treasurer was there. I was there from the crossbench, and then some of the government ministers came in and out. So it was really much more of a community and consultation than it was a political one. I think I was there because I've focused a lot on economics in my time in Parliament so far. I've really been pushing for tax reform, particularly about how do we make sure younger working people, sort of reducing the burden on tax on those people in particular. And as well as how do we drive business investment in through the tax system. So I did a lot of work in last term and this term on that, and I think really that got me the ticket to the table.
Would you say you are I'm making this term up, a progressive capitalist?
Yeah, I would say that hard-headed, warm-hearted. I always think about, I met a guy in Bondi once and I said, what are the important values to you? And he said, look, I care about the environment. I want to protect it for future generations. He said, I want to live in a kind society. I wanted to treat people decently. And he said, I'm a small business owner and that's really important to me. And I think that's true of a lot of people in my area. People who go, you know what, I'm socially progressive. I do, worry about everybody, all these sorts of issues, but I'm also pretty hard-headed. I understand how hard it is to make the economy work. I recognize that if business isn't working, nothing, basically, our ability to get the services and the sort of lifestyle that we want, not just for ourselves, but for the whole society, is really problematic. So we do need to make sure businesses work as well as the country works.
And before we kind of continue this discussion, people might think, well, the seat that you represent, it's a lot of old, stagnant money, but that's not the case, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, people have all sorts of views on the eastern suburbs. A few stats, it's 60% people live in apartments, 40% of people are renting. We have a lot of young professionals who come to the eastern suburbs of Sydney because we have wonderful beaches, we're close to the city, it's a great place to live. It's a super wonderful place. We've got Potts Point and Darlinghurst. We also have areas of high social housing, such as in Woolloomooloo. So it's much more diverse than most people think. It is relatively, it is definitely one of the more wealthy areas of the country, but it's also an expensive area to live. So people who are well paid, particularly sort of young people, are also paying a lot in rent as well.
And back to the round table, looking back 30,000 foot view, was this just a political softening the ground for tax reform now that the government will likely have another 6 years?
Look, I hope not. I've been a big push for tax reform,
Yeah.
and when you hear the words tax reform, don't for a minute think it means I'm here to sort of push up taxes. I don't think that's what we should do. I think we need to actually sort of change our mix, not change the amount we tax. But I think it was a genuine consultation, and certainly talking to the other people in the room, there was a real sense that this was actually a genuine engagement. It was about much more than tax, but tax always grabs the headline because it's controversial, and it's difficult and sensitive. But most of the time we talked about things like how to attract capital. How do we manage AI and that transition? How do you make sure regulations are basically simpler so that we can both protect our environment as well as build the clean energy and other infrastructure that we want to quickly. So it was a much broader piece on that, and I think there were some very constructive discussions. But like most things, the discussion is the starting point, the outcomes are the end point. So it's now about sort of the next 2 years really holding the government to account in terms of delivery.
Do you think anything new was actually floated?
I don't know. Most of the ideas I heard were around a bit, but might not be as familiar. I think some of the areas where there was real common ground and people were surprised about that was on something like AI, for instance, where I think people went in with quite a lot of trepidation, a real sense that, the business community and the sort of unions, and the tech communities are on either sides of the divide on this. And I think there was a real sense after that, that saying, okay, we do need to find a way to bring in AI in a way that still protects, our creative, the work of our creatives that we value so much. But also AI is going to transform not just our economy, it's going to transform the entire world's economy. And if Australian businesses fall behind, that's not just going to hurt Australian businesses, that's also going to hurt Australian workers. So while there might be different views still on exactly how to get there, there is this sense of, we are on the same side. I think businesses and people who are working in business are on the same side of, we do need to make sure we use those tools effectively. It is going to be bumpy. I think it's going to be difficult at times. And so, but we need to pull together, need to help everybody through that transition. So there were moments like that where it was a more constructive and positive than I think most people were anticipating.
Do you think any AI legislation needs to be almost look, let's do a temporary freeze. You can't just fire people at the moment because of AI, because when you look at it, AI, it's 10 minutes old. And because legislation moves so slowly, like, is it worth doing some type of pause or something just so we can see where it settles?
Well, I think, to be honest, I probably would say on the other side, I think we need to be careful about sort of putting in legislation because it's so hard to, as you say, to take so long to get to legislation. It is changing so quickly that I think we should be pretty cautious about legislating now. I think we need to, still give it some time. I think most people are still getting their heads around it. And, we're not quite sure how it's playing out. So my kind of personal view is that, we need to look piece by piece at issues, go, can that be dealt with in our current legislation? Are there protections there that can be applied to AI? Or do we need some brand new legislation to deal with it and do it quite specifically on the issues? Because I do mean this sincerely. If our businesses and if we don't actually embrace AI from a competitive point of view, the rest of the world will, and we will be left behind, and that is not going to be good for anyone. So I think that's how I see it was the most effective path.
Talk to us about this training levy that the union movement have put out there to discuss. How did that land when it came up at the table?
I'll be honest, I don't think there was universal support for this. I do think, particularly on AI, there's a sense that we need to help people get up the curve. And I think that's true of kids, that's true of people who work in the social sector, that's true of people in business. And I think from a skills point of view, the more that we're all using it and feel confident, I think the more that the opportunities and the benefits will be more broadly shared across the community. I think the unions are saying, look, we used to have this training levy, why don't we bring that back? And I think the argument from business, which I have quite a lot of sympathy for because I used to run a business, is sometimes the best sort of training you do is actually on the job. Sometimes you want to send people off to an external course. That's the best thing to do. Sometimes what you're doing actually is investing, the best way for them to learn is there. And, I used to run a fashion business. People would come to us trained at university on, or TAFE on fashion. But a lot of what the training we were doing is someone who's been a pattern maker for, 30 years just knows stuff better than probably almost any teacher external to them. And so what you're trying to do is actually that learning on the job is more important and valuable than doing a course. Now, it depends on industry. And I think that was the kind of piece of a one size fits all doesn't necessarily work. Incentives around investing in training are important. So but it's not saying, you have to use externals or to be inflexible about it's a bit of a challenge.
Before we move on to talking a bit about tax and housing and whatnot, the Building and Construction Code, as a casual observer looking in at the media, I'm confused. What the hell is the code? And how do we, maybe you could explain it in layman's terms for people about the pausing of the code. And then secondly, the challenges of a lot of this stuff about productivity is state-based, not federal.
Yeah. Look, I think so. The National Building Construction Code is really the sort of accumulation of rules about how we build and standards and things like that have built over a long period of time, and they're often in response to things that have gone wrong, by either here or in a state or around the world. And they're also things that are trying to legislate things that we've learnt over time. Things that hey, it's better to make sure you build your house well insulated because that's going to save you down the track, in terms of all your power bills and that sort of stuff. So it's a really really important and useful code. It keeps people safe. It makes sure you don't have dodgy buildings. I think the challenge of it is that it's grown like Topsy. It's very complicated. And it gets currently reviewed, I think, every 4 years or 3 years, actually. And so what the industry is saying, we are struggling to build houses. And we are struggling to build houses that anyone can afford. And productivity, or basically how much house gets built per person working, has actually been going backwards for the last decade. So we've got to try and work out how do we make it more efficient to build houses, because otherwise, what just happens is the cost of building stuff goes up. And so the government has said, look, okay, we're going to pause any changes to this building code for the next, really only, to be honest, for the next 4 years instead of 3 years, unless there are sort of serious safety concerns, so that the building sector can sort of settle, stick with one set of rules that they've been working on a period of time, but also so that the government can look at, are there ways that we can either simplify the code, make it more easily accessible for builders, so that the important protections, are prioritised, and to make sure, that people can use it. And so I think this is some of the great challenge of that sort of sense of regulation, not just in building but in other places, is that individually single thing that puts in is, for a good reason and important, but no one's really there looking to say, oh, should we take that out now? And sometimes, just the accumulation of it all together means that you go, actually, this doesn't make sense anymore.
Well, let's talk about tax, and we'll do it right after the break.
If you're after personal financial advice, don't get it from a podcast. But if you want guidance tailored to your situation, head to moneypodcast.com.au and click Get Help. We'll connect you with one of our trusted professionals, financial advisors and mortgage brokers, who work with people right across Australia. No matter where you are, they can help. Now, before we get back to the show, a quick reminder to protect your financial life. That means having income protection sorted. It means having death cover if there's any debt or dependents relying on you. It means getting your personal insurance in order. Most people insure their car, they insure their house, but what about themselves? Sky Wealth, who support this podcast, are specialist financial advisors who can help you get the right cover in place. Their advice is often more comprehensive and better value than going direct through your super. Book a complimentary 15-minute chat at sky.com.au. That's skye.com.au, and they'll point you in the right direction.
Okay, we are back. Ken Henry was at the round table, and I am of the view, like many people, that we don't need a whole other tax review because, it's been done broadly. We know what needs to be done. Did Ken have any comments at the table that were different than his recommendations from 2009? Like, is Ken saying now, let's increase the company tax rate? Was there anything scandalous there?
No scandalous tidbits I can share with you. No, it's interesting. I've worked quite a lot with Ken over the last 3 years, and I think the principles he has in the Henry Review, I think he feels still stands. I think he has different. He expressed different views recently in terms of maybe the detail of certain proposals based on the Henry Review was written 15 years ago, so the numbers have changed and that kind of piece. But I think the principles certainly that he expressed, I think, really still stand.
Yeah, awesome. And your kind of the work, because I think I had you on the podcast last year and we talked about your work, and correct me if I'm wrong, you just want to facilitate a conversation to get movement at the station. Mm-hmm. Do you have your own silver bullet that you want to see changed?
Look, I don't have own silver bullets, but maybe I can say about what I think are the problems, and then maybe we can talk through. I think what I think some of the good options are. We're still trying to get things costed and make sure that these things make sense. But when I kind of look at the tax system, I go there's three challenges I think we've got. One is that young people are struggling to make the same milestones that their parents did. Now, it's due to a bunch of issues, particularly housing, but tax plays into it. Second is that we're not driving business investment and productivity in our tax system. Again, there are many other factors that drive business productivity, but tax is certainly one of them. And finally, we've got an energy transition, and sometimes our tax system actually makes it harder to do that in the cheapest cost way that we possibly can meet our climate goals. So those are kind of the three challenges I've got. And then the question is, look, what, in each of those areas, what are some of the ways that you can try and deal with it?
Coming out of the roundtable discussions last week, there was chatter in the community about this wealth inequality between generations. And one thing I've probably got a problem with is, how can we say to people who are maybe over 60 or 70 that your whole working life, you worked hard, you paid taxes, you were working in the environment that you had, and we wanted you to put more money into super because we don't want the age pension to cover most people and super was set up at a 0% tax rate, I'm shook that there is commentary wanting to start to tax income payments from super from people who are over 65 and retired. Do you think that is a bridge too far?
I think I can see why people really worry about it, and I do get it when people have made plans and have made decisions. And I think the truth is that some of the commentary which has come out of this is a kind of a bit, okay, boomer, you guys have taken us all for a ride, and I think I really disagree with that really deeply. The question I think we need to look at is to go, people have worked hard. People have, followed the rules that were out there at the time, and good on them. This is exactly what we expect in a country. But we have ended up in a situation where I don't think the outcomes that we've got right now are ones that we would say we want to set out to achieve. And I'll give you some examples. For instance, in the 10 years going up to 2016, and we don't have more recent data, but it's probably more extreme since then. A household over the age of 65 has increased their wealth on average by around 50%. A household under the age of 35 has pretty much not changed their wealth at all. So you're seeing parts of our community where people are just getting richer at different levels. You see that the sort of older households, who have worked hard and built up wealth over a period of time, are now on average around 4 times wealthier than younger households, and it used to be 2.5 times. And so what's happened, and those are partly just the features of our tax system, where again, in about sort of 20, 30 years ago, around 27% of people over 65 paid income tax. Now that's down to 17%. And so the question is, this is what's happened in the system. And when I speak to most people, actually of all ages across the country, most people recognise that actually young people are struggling to get ahead. They are 20% less likely to be owning a home in their sort of early 30s than previous generations. They're putting off having kids, and sometimes not having kids at all. We've got the lowest birth rate in history, and I describe it as an upside down tax system, where you are paying more tax when you are young. You've got a HECS debt. You're trying to save for a home, or you're renting. You're trying to put kids in childcare and those sorts of things. You're actually paying more tax as a wage earner than you are if you're receiving most of your income from passive income, from passive assets. And I think that's not incentivizing what we want, which is we want people to work hard, skill up, do everything they can, take the promotion. We want people to be doing that, but we have a tax system that is upside down and is putting pressure on people when they least can afford to pay it, and less pressure, when people are better off. And so, I think how you do it is tricky, and this isn't about saying anyone's taken advantage of it, but I don't think I know many people who go, we want to continue on this trend where if you have money, you make money, and if you haven't had money, if your parents aren't wealthy, if you don't inherit money, it's really hard to get ahead the way that, you used to be able to.
But it all comes back to housing. Like, it would have to be 80% of it, because if you talk to my parents, I think they're 72 now, in the 90s they had inflation and interest rates in the late teens. Relatively speaking, they were doing it tough back then because of those reasons. And I've got friends in their early 30s who were doing it tough for different reasons. We've all got it tough, and I think it just comes down to housing. So what do we do?
Well, look, I think there's a question of we need to build more housing, I think is a big part of it. But I think on housing, and you're absolutely right, the challenge on housing is that if you've owned a house in the last 20 years, you would have seen house prices grow basically twice the rate of income. So that's hopefully never going to happen again, because if it happens again, we are going to cripple this country. But that means that we've had this big asset price inflation, but incomes haven't caught up. And so again, that is why, what can we do? I think that is why I think we have to lower taxes on people who are working and wage earning, so that they can and tilt the tax system back towards home ownership, because what we're seeing at the moment is the opposite of what we want to see. And so how do you do that? That is looking at some of the concessions around sort of passive income, and it is looking about how do you reduce the tax on earned income in wages.
Have you had any knocks on your door from Jackie saying, let's get this over 3 investment properties, no negative gearing up?
From Jackie Lambie?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, to be honest, there are lots of different proposals out there, and I think this is I've got sort of my own views, but I think the truth is that I think that's actually really positive right now to say, look, we do need a bunch of different it's good to have a bit of proposals and a bit of debate. We do need something that the broader population thinks is fair, because it's got to be a sense of fairness, that it's not unfairly penalising people who've made good decisions based on the information they had at the time, but is also making sure that we do have room to help younger people also get ahead. That's the balance we need to strike. And there will be people who are better off, there will be people who are worse off after that, but I kind of think we have to come back to what's the community and society we're trying to build here. And I don't know a single person out there who thinks actually that it's okay for young people to be falling backwards as they are right now. And I know, as you said, a lot of people had those high interest rates, but still that generation who lived through those high interest rates, and I was a kid during that time. I remember when my mum almost lost her business actually with those high interest rates. It's the challenge is what we're still seeing, that this generation could well be the first generation that doesn't actually get any richer than their parents. The stats are saying they're not, like the generation born in the sort of 90s, they're not getting that sort of uplift that you normally see generation to generation, and that is a problem for all of us.
I put a reel up this week around the immigration stats that were just overshot the runway in terms of what Treasury had forecast, and thanks to everyone who slid into my DM saying you're disappointed in me. But I was just looking at the numbers. Do you know, part of the work that you do and the chats with Treasury, the immigration forecast, is that some type of automatic algorithm that gets forecast based on things? Because I don't know, it's just so far off. Like what's actually forecast. And I know you have to look at migration per capita and all that stuff, and loud and clear, it's not the single problem, but, if you've got an extra, 1,000 people a day or a week rocking up, they've got to live somewhere.
Sure. Look, I think that is, immigration numbers are important. But if you talk to most people, most sort of economists, they would say they're not the major driver of housing. They've been a part of it. But what we're not doing, and this did come up in the roundtable, is we're not using our immigrants in the best way possible, in the sense that, sometimes you come in, you get a skilled visa as a carpenter, come to Australia and told you have to go back to the beginning again and, do another 2 years of an apprenticeship. So I think that's certainly, we can get our migration settings better, but it's not going to solve this challenge. And particularly getting skilled migrants in, like you go, skilled migrants, particularly if you're talking about innovation sectors and stuff like that, are a really important part of the growth of our economy, which does help everyone. So you got to get, I'm not saying that we don't have it, we haven't had the settings a bit off. And I think on some of the international students, we have had the settings a bit off, but I don't think it's the perfect way that's going to solve our problem. I think it is going to be about building more houses, and it is also going to be about making sure that we get the tax system right for different parts of the economy.
And last couple of questions. I struggle to reconcile when people, on one hand, we'll call it the government or society, say to older people, you should downsize to free up the home. On the other side of the coin, the government or society say, well, people should stay in their own home longer with care at home and all that stuff. I'm, sitting in a shed in Newcastle right now. As far as I can tell, someone downsizing still needs somewhere to live.
Yeah, sure.
And it wouldn't effectively allow a another magical property out of somewhere. And I think we need to be very careful about telling people to do things for the greater good when it actually doesn't solve a problem.
Look, I think that, people will downsize or upsize. My dad downsized because, for him it was the right personal decision. He didn't, it's too much to manage. I think there is a benefit of downsizing for the whole country. Of course, yes, you're right, everybody still needs a home, but there's a benefit of downsizing from the point of view of saying, so you have a, if someone's downsizing from a 3 or 4 bedroom home and they, need a 1 or 2, that means that there's more, you can sometimes, there's more sort of family homes that are available to people. I think it's really up to people what they do personally. Like this is, this isn't about government telling people. I think this is about what suits people's circumstances. You can get home care, that sort of support, whether you're in you're a bigger home or a smaller home. And, for a lot of people I talk to, the most important piece is about being close to the community you've invested in. So I was talking actually to my parents-in-law, I'd never suggest they downsize out of the little community they live in because, if they can get a place that suits them better, 2 blocks away and is a bit easier to manage, great. But, moving out of their community, out of that support network that they have, I think that's a bad idea for your mental health and everything else. And so I think, but people, we all have different circumstances. We know our families are spread out. People have to just work on what works for them.
So where to from here? What do we need to do as a government to actually move the needle to get this productivity thing happening, to get the pressure that we've talked about with the younger generation relieved? Like, how do we increase wages? Where to from here?
Yeah, look, I think a bunch of things. So on tax specifically, the government says it's going to look at some areas of tax reform around helping younger people about driving business investment and also simplicity. And I was actually just talking to just now some businesses who are saying one of the biggest barriers to businesses investing is actually the complexity of our tax system. So some of that complexity is, it's not about winners or losers. It's just we're all losing because it's complex. Let's see if we can find a way to make it better. In terms of then other parts of what needs to happen, the government has put out a bunch of areas where they're going to be focused on, such as sort of environmental law reform, the housing law reform that we spoke about, things about sort of developing AI skills, things like, this idea that, if you can sort of move occupations, from state to state and take your professional qualifications. So there's a bunch of stuff. Now, as I said, it comes down to the implementation. And that's really where I see my job is as a member of parliament is to really, push the government to say, you've said these are the priorities. This is what I'm hearing from my community. Now, are you delivering in time? And one area I haven't really mentioned, but is a really important one for a lot of people I talk to who run small businesses is something it's like access to capital. Like it's really hard to get a bank loan if you're a small business. And it's even if you're sort of one of those kind of software kind of high growth potential businesses, it's also pretty hard to get sort of equity backing as well. And so I think those are areas where, again, it's win-win. This is not about, win-losers. This is about saying, the banking system used to lend 2/3 of its money to sort of businesses, 1/3 to mortgages. Now it's 2/3 to mortgages, 1/3 to business, and small, medium businesses are really struggling. So that's, again, something I'm going to absolutely keep on the agenda.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining us to have a chat today. How many times a week do you get pitched to have an Allegra Spender party?
Very funny. I'm not sure it's got a great ring to it, but, I appreciate that.
No worries. Allegra Spender, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Any advice is general financial advice only, which does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Because of that, you should consider if the advice is appropriate to you and your needs before acting on the information. If you do choose to buy a financial product, read the Product Disclosure Statement, PDS, and Target Market Determination, TMD, and obtain appropriate financial advice tailored to your needs. Simo Interactive Pty Ltd, the publisher of this podcast, and Glen James are authorised representatives of Money Sherpa Pty Ltd, which holds financial services licence 451289. Opinions or comments from any guests on the podcast are theirs and not those of the host or the publisher or their respective license holders.